there, and welcome to our second segment in the Sketchatorian series brought to you in partnership with the Rockwell Museum. How exciting! So last time we talked about the arrow collar band, so to balance things out a little bit, I thought we'd give the Gibson Girl a little bit of our attention. And we're going to do it in 3 parts. In this first part, we're going to talk about Colliers Magazine, the picture itself, and a light smattering about first wave feminism. In part 2, we're going to talk about the artist, Charles Dana Gibson, and what his Gibson Girls represented. And in part 3, we're going to go surfing across the second and third waves of feminism and try to bring this old-fashioned lady up into 2020. Let's see if we can do it. We're going to base our Gibson Girl inquiry on this image from the October 15th, 1904 issue of Colliers Magazine. Colliers was a weekly illustrated periodical that featured art, literature, and especially around this time, news. It actually helped form the medium of investigative journalism. Colliers was one of the most widely read periodicals of the time, and the magazine invested heavily in both illustration and the burgeoning field of photography. Charles Dana Gibson was a frequent contributor to its pages, and this relationship helped lead to the creation of his iconic Gibson Girl. The Gibson Girl's popularity spanned about 20 years, from around the mid-1890s to approximately 1914, or the beginning of the First World War. She actually predates the arrow collar man by a few decades. This example from 1904 is really in the heyday of her popularity. So, what do we see here? We see a very fashionable, white lady sitting and expertly adjusting her hat with pins in hand and mouth. Her dress is exactly as it should be for 1904. That's an interesting thing about fashion. It changed frequently over the centuries, but there was usually a consensus based on class, gender, or occupation as to what one should be wearing. Sometimes there were even laws stating what you could or could not wear based on those very divisions. Those are called sumptuary laws. They faded in the early 20th century as democracy spread, industrial mass production picked up, and consumer-oriented cultures developed. More on those later. However, lady silhouettes tended to remain fairly similar in the Western world, for lack of a better term, until the 1960s-ish. For example, you could be a flower child with some groovy fringe action, or a Jackie Onassis type looking classy in a pillbox hat. Now it's really a choose-your-own-adventure game where madness reigns and there are no rules. You could wear jeans and a t-shirt, safety pin flannels and buckled jeans with heavy black eyeliner, or step out in your preppiest sweater and skirt combo. They're all equally valid, but back in 1904, that wasn't really the case. If you were on the more radical end of the spectrum, you might have worn something called reform dress. But if you were a typical lady, out and about during the daytime, you aimed to wear something like this picture presents. Decidedly not pants. You'd wear a corset or perhaps even bust bodice underneath your clothes to help give you that sweet S-shaped silhouette, which accentuated curvy hips and a full low chest. You would emphasize that pigeon-breasted look by rocking a shirtwaist tucked into a skirt or by wearing belted dresses. Collars were high, skirts went down to the ankles, hats were big and often feathered or flowered, and coiffures were downright poofy. French fashion reigned supreme in the first chunk of the 20th century, and designers like Doucet, Poiret, and Vianney led that charge of looking fine. If you'd like to learn more about fashion history, books by Lou Taylor and Valerie Steele are great places to start. A girl's outfit might look restricting now, but it's actually a lot easier to move in than women's fashions of previous eras. Sportswear for both men and women began to be a thing at the turn of the century. Just think, we went from corsets to yoga pants in about 100 years. What a journey! The moderately comfier clothes helped identify and shape what's often referred to as the new woman, which is either directly or loosely related to first-wave feminism, depending on which nuance or case study you choose to go with. On an extremely broad and generalized level of first-wave feminism, we're going to accept the wave model of feminism and look mainly at America-ish. So the first wave was a longer movement, perhaps starting in 1792 with Mary Wollstonecraft and a vindication of the rights of women, perhaps in 1845 with Margaret Fuller's Woman in the 19th Century, but things get going in earnest in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention. Most people capped the movement in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. If you'd like to read more about first-wave feminism through primary sources, I recommend the anthology The Feminist Papers, edited by Alice Rossi. Shout out to the second-wave feminists for compiling sources like these. Wave 1 was mostly led by white, middle-class women, and it generally came from a desire to extend the domestic sphere beyond the boundaries of the home. That sounds fancy, but a woman's place was pretty much understood to be the house. The husband went out, and the wife stayed home and raised the littles. Separate spheres was the dominant thought, an ideal that skewed toward people with enough money to actually live that reality. Lower-class women often worked outside the home, or brought outside work, like laundry, into their homes to make ends meet. Class divisions go back 5 ever. First-wave feminists didn't necessarily want to break the mold of being a good wife and mother, and you can pretty safely edit Christian into that background as well. Many just wanted to expand that angel of the house flavor of moral influence into new areas that they felt were natural extensions of their domestic lives, like education, reform movements, and politics. There was also a very intertwined tangle of abolitionism and white supremacy going on, but white women primarily led the charge, and white women were the main beneficiaries of this movement. As suffragists and feminists started expanding the purview of what women could be and do picked up, the concept of the new woman started to spread. Who is she, though? Is she born with this newness? Is it Maybelline? We'll have a nice chinwag about that in part 2.